بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. قال رضي الله عنه ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Hadith 32. Hadith 32 on the authority of Abu Sa'id Sa'd ibn Malik ibn Sinan al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, La darar wa la dirar. There should be no harming nor reciprocating harm. A good hadith related by Ibn Majah, ad-Daraqutni and others, and ranked as Musnad, meaning that it is connected back to the Prophet ﷺ. It was also related by Malik in the Muwatta as Mursal, meaning that it goes back to one of the companions, with a chain of authorities from Amir ibn Yahya, from his father, from the Prophet ﷺ, but leaving out Abu Sa'id, and he has other chains of authority that support one another. La darar wa la dirar. This is one of the hadith that Imam al-Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said upon it is based all of Islamic law. And it is one of the 5 principles of the usul, of the methodology of jurisprudence of the Shafi'i madhab, and indeed of our interpretive tradition. La darar wa la dirar. It's considered one of our first principles, specifically as it relates to the legal sciences. La darar wa la dirar. Some of the mufassirun, or some of the scholars, they say that both words are the same, that there is no harm, that darar and dirar are the same. But the majority understand them to be different, because then there would be redundancy, and there's no redundancy in the speech of the Prophet ﷺ, except if he speaks for the purpose of emphasis. So la darar, there is no causing harm. Wala dirar, or doing something that will cause harm to you. There is no harming another people without cause, or doing something that would cause harm to befall them or to befall you. So any type of harm, any type of darar, any type of harm that would cause to fall on you personally, on your family, on your community, on the wider community, or any type of harm that could befall another people, that is not justified, meaning that if there's an armed conflict, legitimate armed conflict, we talked about that a couple classes ago, or maybe it was even last class, that all of that is haram. So this hadith is of primal importance, because it teaches us that if in our deduction, if in our attempt to apply the Quran and Sunnah in real life, we create a situation that has caused harm, then therefore we've done something wrong. In other words, you can follow the rules. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and all of these little micro rules are correct, but then the whole situation, you've created some kind of mess, you've created some kind of harm. And that's why we have these principles, because these principles help us to understand, well, if you've created a situation in which you've harmed yourself, or you've caused harm to yourself or your community, or you've harmed another people, then you've done something wrong. Then something in the equation is wrong, even if those small decisions were individually correct. I asked one of my teachers once, I said, is there anything in the Sharia that is permissible, that's mubah, it's permissible, but it is recommended not to do it? And he said, of course, there are many things. And I said, like what? He said, like a man marrying more than one woman. He said, it is permissible in the Sharia, but if you do that, you will ruin most likely your first marriage, you'll ruin your relationship with your children, so on and so forth. So even though that specific issue is legislated by the text of the Quran, it's not something that a man can easily do. And that's why we were taught, laysa kullu mubahin mutah. Not everything that is permissible is doable. Why? Because sometimes you engage in the permissible action, and inadvertently you have created harm, either for yourself or for other people. Now, the idea of there is no harm or reciprocating harm, or there is no harm and causing harm onto you or causing harm onto somebody else, so all of the permutations of that, more specifically for us, there is specific sections in Islamic law in which harm is addressed, like we mentioned marriage. So in the books of fiqh, we learn that what are the causes for divorce, for example. Because this is one of those issues. I'm giving you an example of things that are misunderstood. I mean, there are other implications of this, but this is one of the things that is misunderstood. People say in Islam, the man can divorce the wife, but the wife can't divorce the man, which is not true. There are different names for different types of divorce. The male-initiated divorce is called a talaq, divorce. A woman-initiated divorce is called al-khula. A court annulment of the marriage is called al-fasakh. So there are different types of ending the marriage relationship. It's not just one thing. What allows the woman to divorce the husband, or what claims can the woman have against the husband that would necessitate a divorce? Ad-darar. وَتُطْلَقُ الْمَرْأَةِ بِالdarar. That a woman is divorced because of harm. Harm, therefore, is defined as any type of harm: physical harm, emotional harm, verbal harm, psychological harm, financial harm. Any harm that comes from the man towards the woman causes the woman to divorce the man. For example, we have a darar in financial transactions, in different types of financial transactions where there can be harm that is caused. For example, when somebody is about to be bankrupt or something like that, and they're selling off their goods and they're desperate to sell. Now, if you're desperate to sell, if I wanted to sell this and I'm desperate, I'll sell for $10 or something like that, which is harm to me, because that's not the actual in the real market. If I waited a little bit, I could sell it for more or less what the going rate is. So there are protections for that kind of financial sale. Allah Ta'ala addresses the darar, the harm that can happen with bequests and inheritance. That people try, and this is something that we saw and we continue to see, unfortunately, in the Ifta office, is that many people try to rob one another after somebody dies of their inheritance. So somebody dies, and then 2-3 days later, magically, somebody comes with this, they open a drawer and they find this piece of paper. Oh, he wrote everything to me right before he died. These type of scenarios. And sometimes these things can take years in the courts to be able to find out what's right versus what's wrong. Allah Ta'ala addresses a darar, addresses the harm that can happen when people try to cut each other off from their inheritance, or when somebody tries to cut somebody out of their inheritance, so on and so forth. So this hadith is one of those overarching hadiths that has direct application to Islamic law. So if you study the Sharia, if you study Usul al-Fiqh, you'll find this very, very common, that there is a discussion in Usul al-Fiqh of what is the definition of a darar. Because a darar is also related to something else, which is a darura, which is a necessity. And one of the principles that we have in Usul al-Fiqh is ad-darurat tubih al-mahdhurat, that dire circumstances allow the impermissible, cause the impermissible to be permissible. So if we are stranded somewhere and we have nothing to eat or drink, and all that we have to eat and drink is something that is haram, at that moment, not only is it permissible for us to eat and drink that which is originally haram, it is obligatory for us to eat and drink that, because that is the only way that we can sustain life. So because that matter is so big, the ulama define, well, what is a darura versus what is a haja, what is a need? What's a dire circumstance, life and death, versus what is a need? Al-haja versus al-tahsaniyat, versus things that just, make life more, having a rug in the mosque is it's not like a life or death situation, but it's nice to have the rug in the mosque. It's kind of better to have it because we're more comfortable, we can sit. But we can certainly pray without the rug, or we could pray outside, so on and so forth. So this hadith usually is found in the discussions of law. But for our purposes, we can take it, or we should take it, as a general piece of advice in our life, that we also are not to cause ourselves any harm, nor should we cause harm to other people. So in our relationships with ourselves, with our family, our spouses, our children, our neighbors, our extended family, our co-workers, so on and so forth, we also need to think about what's the quality of those relationships, and not to cause harm to them or for them to harm us. And them harming us could be caused by us doing something to them that they retaliate, and it just becomes this never-ending cycle. So there is no harm and reciprocating harm. And it is based on this hadith that many modern fatwa opinions exist concerning, for example, certain types of tobacco products, in the fatwa that deems cigarettes and cigarette smoking and its derivatives to be haram, they will cite this hadith, la darar wa la dirar, that this can cause harm and cause unnecessary harm to you or to somebody else. So this hadith is something that it's almost like a statement. It's almost like a common thing, wisdom that people say, la darar wa la dirar. So this is something for us to consider, not only as it applies, as I said, to the legal stuff, which is usually how we think about it, but also as common advice. Hadith 33 on the authority on Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, were people to be given in accordance with their claim, men or people in general would claim the fortunes and lives of other people. But the onus of proof is on the claimant, and the taking of an oath is incumbent upon him who denies. A good hadith related by Al-Bayhaqi and others in this form, and part of it is in the two Sahihs, Bukhari and Muslim. Al-Bayyinatu ala al-mudda'i wal-yaminu ala man ankar. Again, this is another famous hadith that's oft quoted. This hadith directly deals with how we adjudicate cases in the courts. In Islam, we have something unique that it doesn't exist in other systems of law, that we have three distinct aspects of the law. We have fiqh, which is can be thought of private law. Private law is pure law. It is law that is studied academically, scholastically. It is law that looks at the origins of that legal system, researches the origins of certain laws, and seeks to articulate the origins of those laws in a language now that people can understand. What makes the law that we have in any given country legitimate? Why is this law legitimate? Not that the law is established by the state, but what makes it legitimate? What makes it legitimate is what happens in private law, is that the private law articulates from the origins of the tradition of that country or that nation to articulate that law. So therefore, the sources of that law make this law legitimate. So if somebody, for example, today in Congress said, we're going to pass a law, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, that from now on in America, the federal government, all inheritance, that the man will take twice the inheritance of the woman, right? I mean, if that were passed, there'd probably be like a civil war. Why? Because where do we get this? Is a verse in the Quran, and the verse in the Quran means something that most people, something other than what most people think, but that's something different. That Quran has no legitimacy here in this legal tradition. So a senator can't stand and say, based on the verse such and such in surah such and such, we're going to pass this law. Everyone's like, what is that? It doesn't mean anything to us. But if you go to a Muslim country, and the Muslim country in the parliament or the legislative branch tries to do the opposite, we're going to negate in the inheritance law of our country, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Everybody would be up in arms for the same reason, that is not part of our legal tradition. Our legal tradition comes from the Quran, comes from the traditions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's private law. Then we have something else called al-fatwa, the job of the mufti, which is to answer questions that people have in the here and now, but to give a non-binding answer. And then we have a third area, which is al-qada, which is the actual courts. The court, the judge's decree or the judge's opinion is binding in the dunya and in the akhirah. So we have these three distinct things. In the Western tradition, this fatwa thing really doesn't exist. And this is one of the unique things that Islam has. There is something similar to it in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish rabbinic tradition, but a little bit different than us. So the fatwa is a middle ground between pure law and between al-qada. The mufti's ruling is not binding, but the mufti has to be licensed to be a mufti. And the mufti's opinion is specific, it's not general. So the mufti gives a fatwa to this person for this circumstance in this situation. Not that you can take that necessarily and run with it, that it's applicable for all time, in all places, in all circumstances. So this hadith, just giving you the background, this hadith belongs to that third aspect of how we adjudicate cases. And sometimes when there is sulh, when there is reconciliation. So sometimes when people come and they have a disagreement, and they want somebody like me to arbitrate, or someone like Imam al-Rifai to arbitrate, this is again one of the hadith that we look to, that there are two people that are coming. You can't just go with what one half says. You can't just go with, because in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that sometimes you can come to me and you can beautify your case to me, such that I would incline to judge for you versus the other person. Right? But that's not the way to be fair. But rather, the Prophet ﷺ said the onus of proof is on the claimant. So the one who brings the claim, I say, for example, I come to Brother Muhsin, I say, Imam al-Rifai stole my copy of Sahih al-Bukhari. So I want to kick him out of the mosque because he stole my copy of Sahih al-Bukhari. So Brother Muhsin, he knows this hadith now, so he's going to be like, okay, where's your proof? And I say, oh, I have a picture, an image, or I saw it in his car or something like that. So let's bring Rifai. So bring Imam al-Rifai. So what is Imam al-Rifai? He has an oath. So Imam al-Rifai, he comes in front, he says, Wallahi, I swear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I didn't steal his copy of Sahih al-Bukhari, but I saw it in his library and I liked it, so I bought my own copy. So now I brought my proof, and now he has brought his oath. So now we are on equal footing. This also shows us the importance of the oath, because the oath is an oath that you make in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we accept the oaths of one another. If somebody comes and says, I swear, wallahi, this happened or this didn't happen, I have an obligation to believe that person. I don't have to investigate more. Because lying is a kabira, it's a big sin. And were somebody to be known as a liar, they would lose their right to give an oath, they would lose the right to testify, they would lose the right to be a witness. And therein lies one of the most important differences between the Islamic paradigm and other paradigms of thought. We look to the veracity of the person first, then we look to what that person says. Whereas in other systems of thinking, they look at what is said first, then they look at the person. So let me say that again, because this is very, very fundamental. We look at the person first. Is this person honest, trustworthy, upright, known to be a practicing Muslim, known to stay away from haram things? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, then therefore I trust whatever they're going to say. When the Prophet ﷺ came back from the Isra and Ma'raj, and the Quraysh came to Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhum, they said, what did they say? They said, Ya Abu Bakr, your friend, he's crazy. Look what he said. He says, he went last night to Jerusalem, and then he went up and down and all around. What did Sayyidina Abu Bakr say? If he said that, then it's true. Because we look at the person. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he's the first to become Muslim. He lives with the Prophet ﷺ from the very early years of Islam. So he saw him ﷺ in all of his public and private moments. So he says, there's no way that this man lies. He doesn't lie about anything. So if he said that, I believe, I'm the first one to believe. And based on this is our entire intellectual history. How we accept the Quran as being transmitted, how we accept the Hadith as being transmitted, how we accept the madhahib of fiqh as being transmitted. Dabit an dabit, somebody who is known to be upright and honest, to have a good memory. He heard from somebody, or she heard from somebody who was upright, honest, known to have a good memory, so on and so forth. Then we look at what is said and we can critique it. Because maybe somebody carries a piece of information. That piece of information, there are question marks in it. But we don't say that the person who carried the piece of information lied. We say, no, this text is sahih. I have no doubt in this text. But the text itself I don't know, I have some questions about that, because it doesn't jive with some of the other things that we know. Whereas in other systems of learning, it's the exact opposite. We almost don't care in this country or in the Western culture, we really don't care who says what. We look at what is said. If what is said makes sense to me now, then I accept it. But if what is said doesn't make sense to me now, then I don't accept it. I'm not really worried about who said it. And that's a completely different way of thinking. And it has a completely different set of issues involved in that. So when the Prophet ﷺ says that taking the oath is incumbent upon the one who denies, that's a really, really big statement, because that means that we trust and believe what each other says, because that is the enormity of lying, is that you would lose the trust of the community forever. To be known as a liar, God forbid, is a horrendous thing. You can be known as a weak person. You can be known as somebody who has a weakness for certain sins, but never to be known as a liar. Because if we lie about something, why is lying an enormous sin? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained something to happen. So in the fake example that I gave, Allah ordained that Imam Rifai buy his own copy of Sahih al-Bukhari. So if he were to lie about that, then he is lying about something that Allah Ta'ala has already ordained. That's why lying is a great sin. Admit that you made a mistake. But to lie about something means that you are telling Allah subhanahu, you have a problem with what Allah has his qada, with what he has preordained something to happen. Allah Ta'ala, A happened, therefore you have to say A happened. But for me to say, no, A didn't happen, but B happened, then I am playing with the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why lying is an enormous sin. So in this hadith, of course, the main function of the hadith is to teach us about how we adjudicate cases, that we look for proof from one person or one side that's claiming, then we have the oath of another side. Maybe we need further evidence. But the oath stands, it's a weighty matter. If somebody swears by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, khalas, then that's the end of that. Can't prosecute that person. Because the thought that somebody in court, in front of the qadi, would lie by taking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name and lying is so beyond the scope of what is possible. As a matter of fact, in the case of li'an is a public imprecation in which a man or one spouse accuses the other spouse of being unfaithful, which is an enormous thing. The oaths that are taken in court publicly, the last oath that the person makes, whether the man or the woman, is that you make an oath, may the curse of Allah be upon me if I'm lying. I mean, I would never want to say that ever. But it's so serious that the qadi is supposed to intervene to the person saying this in the court situation, to remind them of the enormity about what they are about to say. To give them the option that, maybe you don't want to do this, because you don't want the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be on you. Don't lie about something this big. There's nothing that Allah ta'ala won't forgive, even if there are some difficulties in the dunya. But the Sharia teaches us that the qadi is to tell the person what you're about to say is serious. Think about what you're about to say. Think about the enormity about what you say. Are you cognizant of what you're about to say? Almost to coax them not to say it, not to go through with it. That is how serious the situation of the oaths are. And of course, the legal permutations of this hadith are too many for us to discuss, but we can find those in the sections of courts and testimonies in court. It's very interesting because you find, funny things about the judge, or even about the mufti, that the qadi or the mufti can't, sit and do their thing if they're sleepy, if they're tired, if they're gassy, if they're hungry, if it's too hot, if they're too cold. And it's a very serious situation to be able to adjudicate between people. And you can't accept presents from, i.e. bribes from both sides, things like that. So it's a whole legal tradition that we can talk about another time, inshallah. Hadith 34 on the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu, who said, I heard that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, whosoever of you sees an evil action, let him change it with his hand. And if he is not able to do so, then with his tongue. And if he is not able to do so, then with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. It was related by Muslim. This is a very important hadith. This hadith speaks about al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy an al-munkar, to enjoin the good and to forbid the evil, which is something that is Allah Ta'ala associates with us as an ummah. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas. You were the best of nations. Allah Ta'ala uses the past tense to emphasize the adjective. Yani you were, are, and always will be. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas. You are the best of nations sent to mankind. Why? Ta'muruna bil ma'rufi wa tanhawna 'anil munkari wa tu'minuna billah. Because you enjoin the good, forbid the evil, and believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the functions of being a Muslim is that if something is right or something is good, we call people to it. And if something is bad, harmful, or evil, we warn people about it. Not just us, but anybody. If there's a public health scare or there's a public problem, we are the people that are to be involved in that. Not put our heads in the sand and just build a fence around us and like, oh, we're okay. No, if there's a problem, problems with climate, problems with gun control, problems with what are some of the environment issues, all of these things are things that we are supposed to be a part of, because we're supposed to enjoin the good and forbid the evil, because we have the hadith of the boat, right? That society is like a boat, and the people on the top and the people on the bottom. Remember this hadith, hadith al-Safina. The people on the bottom want to drill a hole to draw water so they don't bother the people on the top. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if the people on the top don't stop the people on the bottom, all of them are going to sink. Right? That's society. So we're all in the same boat of society. So it affects our neighbor here, and our neighbor there is also going to affect us. And what's good for us, we also want it for our neighbor here and our neighbor there, irrespective of creed, race, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter, because all of society is that boat. So this hadith is one of those hadith that we all know, but it's also one of those hadith that many people misunderstand, especially the social justice activist Muslims and the Muslim groups, the Muslim political groups. I don't want to give specific names because this is an open class and we were taught not to give names. I think I mentioned this before, that 97% of what we are supposed to do is just to teach, and we reserve a couple of percent per year to call out people by name. I think I've already used my percentage on that this year, so I have to remain very bland and vanilla. But there are many people that misunderstand this, because the key of the hadith is not changing with the hand, the tongue, and with the heart. That's not the key to the hadith. The key to understanding the hadith is if you are not able. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ. That's the key to the hadith. In other words, there are conditions, legal conditions for engaging in al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. That's what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us. In other words, for us as Muslims, the consumption of alcohol is haram, and the consumption of alcohol is al-khaba'ith. It's the biggest of all of the major sins. And the person who consumes alcohol, Allah doesn't accept their prayer for 40 days, so on and so forth. So I'm in a Muslim country, in a Muslim city, and I'm walking by a restaurant and I see somebody with alcohol. So can I take that bottle of alcohol and smash it on the guy's head? Can I do that? Well, whoever sees an evil action, let him change it with his hand. Am I allowed to do that? What would you say? Technically, yes? No. Yes, see, the young people are just pure, right? That's right. No, of course not. Not only am I not allowed to do that, but if I did that, the Sharia would say that I have to, I would be punished for that in some way, shape, or form. Because the authority for me to do that, al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, to enjoin the good and forbid the evil, in that instance has not been given to me. But the authority of that has been given with law enforcement. Law enforcement, police, or what forms, whatever we call, let's just say police, because it's sort of when I say the word police, I don't mean the police, and I'm not talking about that. I'm saying police as in the linguistic word of police, the people who guard law enforcement in any society. They are the people who have been given that power to enjoin the good and forbid the evil by their hand. They have the right to stop a crime, to arrest somebody for the crime, so on and so forth. So I can't do that because in most Muslim countries, they follow the Hanafi position, because there are large non-Muslim populations in these Muslim countries, and they follow the Hanafi position that allows that. So whether that person is Muslim or not, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I don't have the right to do that. Now, how about here, where it's a not Muslim country? Equally, I'm not allowed to do that, right? Because it's legal here, and that's the dominant way. The dominant way is that everyone drinks. People think we're strange because we don't drink. I remember when I was in high school, I was like the permanent designated driver. All of the parents trusted me with their fancy cars and everything because they knew I didn't drink. It's like, oh, if you're going out with him, then you can, then we trust that because I don't drink. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So the key to understanding this hadith is not being able to, meaning that there are conditions for enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. So the doing the thing by force, you can only do that if you have been given the authority to do that. But there are other circumstances when we have been given the authority, like if we see somebody that's being assaulted, then we have the right and the obligation from a society point of view and an Islamic point of view to step in and to stop that. If you saw, I don't know, somebody, we see this example a lot. People that go into a store, it's a hot day, and they leave a child in the car, or they leave an animal in the car, and the windows are not opened, and there's obvious signs of distress. You see every summer there's at least one or two stories like this around the country. So what do people usually do? They'll break in. Now they'll break in to save that life, whether it's the animal or the child. Now the law is not going to come and say, I'm going to arrest you for that, but the law will come and say you have to pay for the damages, which the Sharia calls ad-daman. You have to cover the damages that you caused. That's fair, but you saved the life. And Allah Ta'ala says, if you save a life, a human life, it's as if you have saved all of humanity. So there are circumstances in which we can physically get involved in the amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar. But if we cannot, in other words, if we have not been given this right, if we're not law enforcement, or we're in a situation in which we can't stop it physically for whatever reason, we have other means which we can speak about it. And in this country, we are free to speak, we are free to teach, we are free to preach. So therefore, we have a pulpit, if you will, in which we can indicate to people what we believe in. And we have forums that are in the greater community, and we have the interfaith intersection that we're a part of. We have elected officials that many of the people in the community engage in, but this is also a way of al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar, because we have been given this right. And our system of government is founded on the right for us to voice our opinion to our elected officials. It's expected that we do that. It's expected that we challenge them. It's expected that we talk to them and we present facts to them, so on and so forth. But there are certain places in the world where you can't do that. That there are certain limits to the freedom of expression that you have to voice your opinion about governments, about policies, so on and so forth. So in those places where you can't, again, the Prophet ﷺ, if you are not able to, then at least you can hate it with your heart. So I reject that. I reject what this is doing, or what that's doing. I can't change it with my hands because I haven't been given the circumstance. I can't change it with my tongue because I'm not allowed to. Maybe the regime is oppressive, or maybe this specific issue, it's very, tight. I mean, if I were in North Korea, I'm not going to go around talking about the government at all. Be like, Assalamu alaikum. You can't. You're not allowed to. And there are that's an extreme example. I mean, we probably would never be there. But there are other countries in the world where you can't just stand up and say what you want about the government, whether they're Muslim countries or not. So therefore, this hadith or this concept of al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar The reason it's commonly misunderstood is that the end of the hadith, وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, right? This is the weakest of faith. So because of the word weak, people assume therefore, well, I don't want to be a weak person of faith, I'm going to change it by hand. So all of these Muslims that are on the social justice wave, and they think that this is the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth pillar of Islam, they want to change everything by force. They want to force the change. They want to force the government to change, any government. They want to force the policy to change. They want to force people to change under the name of justice. The problem with that, other than that it doesn't work with the hadith the way the hadith is narrated, is that there's another issue that we're not paying attention to, which is that the Prophet ﷺ told us, كَمَا تَكُونُوا يُوَلُّ عَلَيْكُمْ, as you are, so will the government over you be. So traditionally, the Muslims saw this, usually, not always, but usually the state of the government as a sign of the state of the people, not the other way around. So if the guy or the people on the top were bad, then the ulama will say, oh, we have to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've done something wrong. So not all the time, but usually that's the case. But definitely the case now. I mean, look at the people that are running for office. La ta'ali, one cannot comment. I mean, in this country, look at what's happening with our government. SubhanAllah, in one generation, we have clowns running for office. So this is a sign that the society has produced these people, that society is listening to these people, that society is flocking to these people. I mean, the fact that people that are banned from certain social media platforms are still trending, right, shows you that the thirst that people have for these people and what they're doing and what they're saying and you know what they eat and how they dress and their different statements. The people are supporting that. They're supporting that call for attention. So the social justice people forget that that's one aspect. The social justice people also forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us very clearly, يُؤْتِ الْمُلْكَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَنْزَعَ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah ta'ala gives dominion, political dominion and power to whom He chooses, and He takes it away from whom He chooses. It's not for us, but this is something that Allah ta'ala has held for Himself. Now, I know that this is almost exact opposite of what we in the democratic Republican form of government that people seek offices, but there was a time in this country, one of the reasons why General McClellan, who was one of the generals of the Union Army in the Civil War, one of the reasons why he did not receive the nomination to run for president was because he wanted to run for president. That at that point it was considered, you don't do that. The party has to select you. And we're only talking about the 1860s, right? So the party selects the person, not the person says, I'm like, today I declare that I'm going to demolish everyone and I'm going to make America what it's supposed to be and I'm running for president. That's all new stuff. That's not how the country was in the beginning. It was considered untoward that you do that. That the party is who selects you, and that's one of the reasons why he didn't make it. I mean, thank God, because he wanted to make peace with the Confederacy. I mean, alhamdulillah, that didn't happen, and ultimately Lincoln prevailed. So even in our own culture, that exists, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives dominion, He gives political power when it is facilitated. But the social justice people, they take this hadith not understanding the thing about the conditions and thinking that having rejecting something with your heart is somehow some way or somehow negative. Therefore, they want to do everything by force. But this is a matter that we can't force. Rather, we have to do the hard work. This is the hard work. We have to build our community. We have to teach our youth one step at a time. Hopefully, the next generation that comes out from this will be 100 times better than our generation. And then they'll pass on what we have taught better, and then the generation after that will be better, so on and so on. That's how real change happens, when it comes from the grassroots up. But to sort of parachute from the top, to force things to change by force, especially now that people try to do it online, you see how there's no efficacy in that, because it's all fake, it's not real. It's not like the, boots on the ground type of reel. Very, very important hadith. And there's actually a great book by Ibn Nahas radiallahu anhu, rahimahullah, a whole book about the rules of al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy an al-munkar. It's a very, very fascinating book that I'm reminding myself of, that I would like to re-look at and reread. Should we do one more? Or are there any questions? Questions? Yeah.
So it sounds like it's mostly just for legal things, right? That's the authority for things.
No, hadith number 34 is not just for legal things, but anything that is considered good, or that we call to good, that we have an obligation to enjoin it, to rally for it, to remind people of it. So it could be things like, for example, during COVID, there were certain things that we were supposed to adopt: social distancing, wearing masks, washing our hands, and then a year into it, the vaccines, and getting people, to take the vaccine, and encouraging our community to get the vaccine. And then after that, maintaining the masks and the social distancing in the mosque, because there are elderly or high-risk people in our community. All of that's a form of enjoining the good and forbidding. So we all rallied. I mean, none of us wavered in complying or in doing that, because that's something that concerns the good of all of us. And we abided by enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. So things like that.
So does that also mean that it's things that are communal, or could this also extend to authority that parents have on their kids?
Both. It's communal, and it's also the authority. What do you mean by authority of parents over their kids? Because that sounds like a con.
So
Yeah.
it mostly stemmed from, I feel like I'm always talking about social media during these, but on social media, you have like people coming at women who don't wear hijab, and like there's just like flood of comments like saying, where's your hijab? How are you calling yourself Muslim because you're not wearing hijab? And then if you retaliate saying that, that's just rude. They're like, they literally like will quote this hadith saying that like, if you can't change it with your hands, at least speak on it and things like that. So that type of authority. And then the people counter it with saying that's just the business of the parents. The parents, or like, like the mahram men of these women should be the ones advising them. Who are you to be advising these women on the internet whether they should or should cover up, things like that.
Okay, that's a good example. I'm glad that you shared that. So let's take the hijab thing. Let's say there's a woman or a man online saying that there is no proof for the hijab in the Quran, or there is no proof for the hijab in the Sunnah. That's one person. And then there's another person, a woman, who just doesn't wear hijab, but she's doing all of this important work on behalf of the community. Those two are night and day difference. The person that it's saying that there is no proof, that's not right. That's wrong, because there is proof. And even from the prima facie understanding of the verse, وَلْيَدْنِينَ بِجَلَابِيبِهِنَّ وَلْيَدْنِينَ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ بِجَلَابِيبِهِنَّ. I mean, that's just very clear. You don't even need to, that's enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, because somebody's trying to change something that is necessarily known from the religion. So in that case, somebody like me should say, no, that's actually wrong. This is what it means, so and so. The other sister that's doing all of this work, that's advocating, that's helping the community, she's a physician, she's an accountant, whatever the case may be, then she's struggling with something personally, a personal obligation that she hasn't done. I have personal things that I'm supposed to be doing that I don't do, but you just don't see them because I'm a man. There's no reason to engage in that, because that's different. Enjoining, what's the evil? The evil is somebody trying to change something that is halal to haram or haram to halal.
Okay, I just want to comment that these women, they're not talking about hijab at all. They're literally just talking about whatever topic that their video is about, but people will just be commenting. Like,
so if it's so haram, what are all those guys and girls doing on her social media account?
Right, that's what I
Just go somewhere else. Yeah, I mean,
exactly. So I mean, there's
and if you
like,
wanted to take it to its logical, conclusion, why are you on social media anyway? Because you're going to see all these women that don't have hijab and all these haram things anyway.
some of these women will be talking about religious subjects, like, giving a good message about something deen related, but people will be like, why are you talking about it? Because you don't wear hijab and things like that.
Yeah, that's different. We want to encourage each other to do good things, but we're not going to bring, next Friday, you're not going to find a sister standing giving the khutbah. I mean, you can't do that. There's just no, but she, a sister can come and give a lesson or give the bayan, and then one of us can do the khutbah that's shorter. So there are ways around it. But if something is just clearly wrong, no, we're going to say that it's wrong. But when people are enjoining the good, when they're trying to do good, we encourage them to do good because we want to build them. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ, he built a community. He put his trust in them, his love in them, he encouraged them, and they did great things. Those people did great things. But when you keep putting somebody down, then they're just going to end up leaving the deen altogether.
I have other questions, but if anyone else has
Go ahead.
questions.
Well, you have the mic, so.
Okay, I had them written down. Okay, for Hadith 32, my question was about like the harm of like it being specific to like maybe like a subsection of people. So let's say for people with insulin resistance or diabetes, you can make the argument that sugar is like way more harmful for them than maybe someone who's, not metabolically challenged or something. What's the stance on that?
Exactly, and that's why there are different opinions. For example, on tobacco. Why all of the fatwas were not singular, is exactly for that reason that the harm, the harm is not completely subjective, but it's different. Exactly for what you said. So, an 88-year-old person with emphysema and a weak heart is very different than an 18-year-old person. So if somebody has a blood sugar problem, then certain foods would be harmful for them that it wouldn't necessarily be harmful for somebody else. So yes, the darar or the harm can change for different people for different circumstances. And the mufti has to be able to understand that to give an accurate opinion or an accurate fatwa. Exactly what you said.
Okay, so it would have to be heard from a mufti, like my sister can't come to me and be like, why are you eating sugar? You have this issue, like it's haram for you type thing.
I mean, that's you can't say that. Just like a blanket statement like that. Again, it's what is the medical condition that the person has.
If like let's say if I have pre-diabetes or something and she's like, why are you eating sugar? Like obviously I shouldn't, but
there are degrees of harm as well. Not all harm is just red, no, block. There are, things could be makruh, they could be disliked, things could be non-advisable, so on and so forth. So again, Islamic law is very precise. It's not black and white. It's not either yes or no. It's not either good or bad, but there are degrees. So even here, the darar, they could be in degrees.
okay, Jazakallah khair. I want to save the other question for Tuesday's question and answer.
Oh, that's right. That's Tuesday. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Take the mic. Yes.
Online? Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
So in terms of the discretion given to, let's say, a father to determine al-wasiyya, or to write down the will, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Quran speaks in details about will and inheritance. But there are items within the inheritance where the father knows how much he gave to a specific son and why is he giving more to that son, and it kind of falls out of the scope or of the formula that exists within the Quran. And then if the father passes away, it's sent to the courts. Does the court have jurisdiction? Let's say, I'm sorry if I'm bringing legal cases, but it seemed that what I want to know is in Islamic law how much discretion is given to the person who writes the will, and is it and could it be rewritten by the courts, let's say, when it comes to the...
Well, these are two issues. From the issue of the bequests, the wasiyah can only be 1/3 of what will be left. So any one of us can leave a bequest for up to 1/3 of their wealth, not more than 1/3. Except if all of the people that would inherit agree. So let's say I want to leave everything to the masjid. then everyone, my children, my wife, everyone that would inherit from me have to agree, then I can leave everything to the masjid. The other thing is that if I give something to a child while I'm alive, this is not an inheritance, but this is changing the milkiyah, changing the ownership from me to, so let's say I have 3 parcels of land and I give 1 parcel of land to each child. Now, this has nothing to do with inheritance. This is just a transaction. I change the ownership from me to this child, from me to this child, from me to this child. So there's after death, the death doesn't impact that. Now, as for the legal, that's one issue, the sort of the general sharia or fiqh of that. As for the issue of the courts, it's much more complicated than that, because the judge has to investigate and determine whether the documentation that has been presented is documentation that can be relied on or not. So this is not an issue of fatwa, but an issue of qada, of the judge. They have to look at the handwriting. They have to look, is it notarized? Most Muslim countries require that these type of things be notarized. But I open a drawer, the person that died under their mattress, they found a little scribbled piece of, usually those things won't hold up in court. It has to be notarized. In other words, it has to be official. And if things were found to be wrong, the court can undo those things if the judge finds that to be the case.
I'm sorry, but for instance, if the father, I mean, yes, before he dies, he writes down a will, and he realizes that one of his daughters, let's say, takes care of her. She's the main breadwinner in her own family, and she actually has so many, financial obligations, and he equates her with another male in terms of inheritance.
But this would be a bequest less than 1/3. That's okay. That would hold.
After his death, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just within the will.
But that's
itself.
all we'll see.
So,
Yeah. But he's just increasing her share, but he's not giving her more than 1/3.
okay, thank you so much.
Online. So what?
If people want to change things, organic change from the bottom up or inside out is the best. But doesn't activism, activity, etc. also add to the organic processes without getting violent or forceful about them, rather educate and compassion?
No, that's not how real change happens, nor has change happened historically. Think of the most turbulent times in Islamic history. Think of the time in which the Prophet ﷺ passed. Think of the fitna between the Sahaba. Think of the sacking of Baghdad and the execution of the Khalifa. Think of the Mongol, which was the Mongol invasion. Think of the collapse of the Ottoman Khilafah in 1924. Think of whatever, the trauma, the traumatic, the occupation of Jerusalem by the Crusaders for almost 100+ years. Think about all of that and put that in one column, and then put in another column all of the luminary people, whether they be politicians, warriors, ulama, saints that lived at that time. And you will see that those people did exactly what we're doing right now. Imam al-Ghazali's book, Ihya Ulumuddin, was written partially in Jerusalem, in the Aqsa Mosque, while it was under occupation. You didn't read the story of Imam al-Ghazali with a picket, leading the picket charge or picket fence or the protests against the Crusades or anything like that. But he continued to service the community in exactly the way that we're doing now. This is how real change happens. And the reason it happens is because this is how the deen is passed from generation to generation. All that other stuff makes you feel good in the now. It's almost like a shahwa. It's almost like a hidden desire, but it doesn't really make change. It makes you feel good. You went downtown and you yelled in the microphone in front of the White House, and you marched on the United Nations building in New York. You feel like you did, but that didn't change anything. It's not, you felt better. This is the real change. This is how it happens. And this is the way of the Salaf. So that's what I'm saying, Sister Shanaz. Anybody else? No.
Very important. If you could stick to that hadith, that it could be a lot better for me to understand.
Which hadith?
The hadith just you read that if you cannot change by force, then by tongue,
Mm.
at least by heart.
So what about the hadith?
It's very important hadith. If we could stick to that, learning from that hadith, it could be a lot better rather than going many different areas.
Well, we're reading the book, so we finished the hadith. No.
In the Sharia that the witnesses, kind of the credibility of the witnesses would be assessed by their character, if I understand correctly. How did the Sharia look at people who may be honest people, but have faulty memories, may have misperceived things? It's not that they're dishonest or trying to mislead anybody. And this happens all the time in kind of modern court cases where there are false identifications, and these aren't people who are considered to be, perjuring, but they're just wrong. How did the Sharia handle that kind of?
Well, there are different levels, there are different degrees. So of course I made it like black and white, somebody that's moral versus someone that's immoral, but in reality it's not like that, because the reality is that most people are upright, but like you said, they didn't remember accurately, they might be forgetful, they weren't able to, they saw just a glimpse of something, they didn't see the whole thing. So there are ways of critiquing the veracity of what the witness brings, just like there are different types of testimony, or there are different types of information that are passed by people. So somebody passing a hadith, narrating a hadith verbatim versus somebody narrating a hadith by its meaning. I heard the Prophet ﷺ say exactly, innamal a'malu binniyat. That's one thing. Or I heard the Prophet, I think what he was saying was, the niyyah is very important. The person who narrates by the meaning, if they're upright, okay, it's upright, but that hadith is not going to be as strong as the hadith that's narrated verbatim, because he's narrating. For example, there are some people that think that there is a hadith that says, don't strike, the hadith that says that Adam was created, that Adam alayhi salam was created in the image of God. People think that that's a hadith, but that's actually an example of a hadith that's narrated by its meaning. The actual hadith that's verbatim, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't strike your brother because Adam was created in this image, meaning that we were created in the image of Adam. But because of the people and the mixing with the people of the book, Jews and Christians, I can't remember which is the narrator, he narrated the same sentiment, but the meaning of what's found in the Hebrew Bible, etc. So that doesn't mean that guy did it on purpose. But that text is not, obviously we're not created in the image of God at all. That's heretical. We don't say that at all. But that doesn't necessarily mean that person we have to kick out. When it comes to the court, the same thing. There are certain things that people, a witness in a court case would bear witness to that it's impossible to equivocate on. Somebody hit somebody or something like that. It's just a general. But there are specifics. I saw this person driving this car, this color, this make, this license plate, this VIN number. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. So you can critique those type of things. So no, in the fiqh of the witnesses, we would have to investigate all of those things. And if we have to impeach somebody's testimony, we would impeach it. But it does not necessarily mean that that person is impeached. It's just that they were found to be wrong. Which is why in some aspects of Islamic law, there needs to be more than one witness. Sometimes one witness is enough. Sometimes you need two. Sometimes you need four. Sometimes a man's witnessing is equal to a woman's witnessing. Sometimes a woman's witnessing is accepted and not a man's witnessing. Sometimes a child's testimony is accepted, depending on the circumstance. So no, there's a lot of gray. Of course, for the purposes of the class, I make things simple. But no, there's a lot of gray. And there's a difference between narrating and witnessing, al-riwaya wa shahada, which is a very big, important distinction. So I also should have made that clear, that when we talk about the narrating of the hadith, what we accept in somebody narrating is that somebody be an upright person and has a good memory. testimony, to call someone to bear witness in a court case, is something different. And oftentimes you need multiple people to do that. Whereas in narration, only one person. If I heard you say something, you giving me a piece of information, I know you're an upright person, you're a good person, khalas, that's enough for me. I don't need to hear it from 5 other different people. So there are different rules for witnessing and narrating. So that thing about 2 women and 1 man is about testimonies in financial transactions, not in narrating. In narrating, a man and a woman's narration is equal. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum
Alaikum
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So I had a question about that. If both of them are essentially, because it reminds me of mubahala, right? They're both taking an oath for the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be upon them if they're lying at the end of the proceeding. Would they be acceptable witnesses? I know this is very unrelated, but would they both be acceptable witnesses in court after that? They've
No.
both taken that oath.
No,
Okay.
that would exclude them from that, which is one of the enormities of it. Because obviously one of them is lying. والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون.